For decades, archaeologists have discovered ancient cities that, by conventional wisdom, shouldn't have existed so early. Civilizations emerge suddenly, with no clear origins or documented transitions to explain their rise. Each time scientists try to explain these phenomena, they return to the same blind spot that has puzzled them for years. The biblical text highlighted a point long ago, yet few have taken the time to read it closely and reflect on its meaning. Genesis tells of Cain, who, after killing Abel, journeyed east and found a wife, raising many questions about it. At first glance, this detail appears minor, a transitional verse that many readers overlook without much thought. Yet the most rigorous theologians in history noted this detail, and their discoveries deeply disturbed them. Because if Adam and Eve were the only humans on earth, then that woman simply should not exist, according to the narrative. The text neither apologizes for her existence nor explains her presence. It simply includes her, as if it were obvious. For 2,000 years, this omission has split scholars, priests, philosophers, and scientists, igniting fierce debates. Today, we will explore the discussions that most debates overlook, diving into the heart of the text's silence. Because the question of where Cain found his wife is not merely a question about ancient marriage customs. It is a question about what kind of world existed before the Bible began to narrate it in the way we are familiar with today. And the answer, if it exists, alters everything we believe we know about the early chapters of Genesis. Let us begin where the text urges us to start, at the exact moment after the first human crime in history. Cain has just killed Abel, marking the first death in all of humanity according to this biblical account. God confronts Cain, who evades the interrogation, and the text records this without any commentary or judgment. Then comes the curse and expulsion as Cain speaks a phrase often read too quickly, ignoring its deeper implications. He says, "Anyone who finds me will kill me," and that word, anyone, is not innocent at all. It carries significant weight. Anyone implies a real population, a genuinely inhabited world, people whom Cain does not know, but who undeniably exist. If the world contained only Adam, Eve, and Cain himself, that phrase loses all its narrative significance and impact. You do not say, "Anyone can kill me," to a father who knows your name and your face since the very first day of your life. The text is purposeful, and this detail marks the first visible crack in the conventional reading of the narrative. Cain then leaves for a territory called Nod, east of Eden, which raises even more questions. In Hebrew, Nod isn't just a place. It means to wander and stray, hinting at deeper themes beneath the surface. The land of Nod is the land of exile, where those who don't belong anywhere find themselves, and that is significant. Upon arriving in this land of wanderers, Cain's first act is to build a city, which speaks volumes about him. Not a temporary tent, not a makeshift shelter, not the camp of a solitary man burdened by his guilt and shame. A city requires organized population and enough human beings for any structure to make sense and serve a purpose. The text says Cain knew his wife and she became pregnant right away, raising more questions about the situation. It doesn't explain how she arrived, who her father was, or her lineage. She simply appears in the story. This deliberate omission is one of the most provocative statements in the Hebrew Bible, inviting deeper reflection. The biblical text does not usually shy away from complicated or difficult family relationships, presenting them candidly. It notes Abraham marrying his half-sister without any apparent discomfort or moral hesitation, which is quite noteworthy. It documents the daughters of Lot sleeping with their own father, doing so with an almost clinical and documentary coldness. It tells of Jacob marrying two sisters and their maidservants, narrating the event with clear and precise detail. The Bible does not hide difficult domestic situations. That is not its literary style in any sense of the term. If Cain had married a sister, the text would have had clear narrative reasons to state it explicitly, which is significant. Instead, it opts for another path, sending him to a distant land where someone intriguing awaits him. This is not a literary accident, because in ancient Hebrew writing, absolutely nothing is accidental or without purpose. The most widely circulated explanation within traditional Christian thought has a specific name and a long history behind it. Known as the theory of sisters, it has circulated since the early centuries of the Common Era, highlighting its significance. The argument is structurally simple. Adam and Eve had many children beyond Cain, Abel, and Seth, which raises questions. Genesis 5 confirms that Adam had sons and daughters during his 930 years of life. The conclusion would be that in the early generations, brothers and sisters must have necessarily paired up for procreation. Because there was no one else available, because the planet was empty, because the species needed to multiply and thrive. The theologians who defend this position add a biological argument that has its own internal coherence and logic. In early generations, before harmful mutations arose, it was biologically viable for siblings to intermarry. It was not the same as modern inbreeding, because the human genome was then cleaner and less prone to errors and defects. This explanation has circulated for centuries, backed by church fathers and medieval theologians, which is quite significant. It remains the official position of many active and established Christian denominations to this day, which is noteworthy. Genesis 5 clearly shows that Adam had more descendants than those explicitly named in the text. But here lies the exact problem that this theory has never been able to resolve in a completely satisfactory manner. It does not answer the original question. It merely relocates it to a place where it seems less uncomfortable and awkward. If Cain married a sister, why does the text not state this directly and without any possible ambiguity or confusion? Why construct the scene narratively as if she were already waiting in that place before he arrived? Which is curious. And more importantly, what do we do with Cain's fear, with that anyone who finds me, without any explanation or context? The theory of sisters resolves the origin of the wife, but does not address at all the terror of unknown strangers lurking. And that terror of an unknown population pushes the reading toward a completely different and much older possibility. A possibility that did not begin in the 20th century, but has deep roots in the very rabbinic tradition itself. To find it, one must return to the beginning of Genesis, but further back than where most people typically return. One must go to chapter 1, then to chapter 2, and look at them with eyes that do not presuppose they are the same text. Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2 are not two versions of the same event. The text itself demonstrates this clearly. The order of events is different, the vocabulary is different, and the name used for God is completely different as well. In chapter 1, God, called Elohim, is the cosmic creator who speaks the universe into existence from nothingness. In chapter 2, God is called Yahweh Elohim, the personal God who forms a man with his hands from the dust of the ground. In chapter 1, humanity is created on the sixth day, male and female together, in a single, significant act of creation. In chapter 2, a man is alone in a garden, and later a woman appears, formed from him, which is quite intriguing. In chapter 1, God blesses humanity, commanding them to fill the earth, multiply and subdue it, a powerful directive. The second chapter depicts a garden with clear boundaries, a river with 4 branches, and a notable forbidden tree. These are not small stylistic variations. They are structural differences that academia has been documenting for generations. The scholars of the 19th century who developed the documentary hypothesis did not invent the problem. They named it. The Talmud's rabbis, long before modern philology, observed the same lines of fracture and division. There were Hebrew teachers who taught that the 2 chapters described 2 distinct creative acts, not just one repeated act. The Elohim of chapter 1 created humanity, tasked with filling the planet, which is a significant mission, and that the Yahweh Elohim of chapter 2 did something different. He chose an individual and placed him in a specific garden. Adam with a capital A, say several rabbinic commentators, is not the name of a man. It is the name of a function and role. A person selected for a unique relationship with God in a profound scenario that the rest of the world does not share. This reading has a name in the history of theological thought. It is known as the pre-Adamic theory, which is significant. The idea that before Adam, or in parallel with Adam, there were already other human beings distributed across the earth, not created in the same way or within the garden's narrative, but still human, which is essential. This idea isn't merely a modern comfort. Its historical roots run much deeper than 20th century thinkers propose. It appears in Jewish texts from the Second Temple period, that is, prior to the birth of Christianity, which is significant. The Midrash, rabbinic literature on biblical interpretation, analyzes it thoughtfully, which is a notable distinction. The Jewish philosopher Isaac de la Peyrère systemized it in a 17th century treatise that shocked Europe. He was burned, banned, condemned by the church, and de la Peyrère was publicly arrested and forced to retract his ideas. But the idea survived because the text that generated it continued to be exactly the same text that everyone was reading. No one could burn Genesis, and Genesis continued to say the same things it had always said, without changing a single word. Cain's wife needs no complex explanation. She existed before the garden drama began. She hailed from the wider humanity that Elohim sent to fill the earth before the garden drama, which is significant. Cain did not find just anyone. He found someone who inhabited the world before his story began, which is profound. The cities archaeologists discover, lacking clear origins, could fit into that broader narrative, which is quite intriguing. Not as conclusive proof, but as coherence between what the ancient text says and what the earth records in its layers. There is a third dimension to this problem that neither of the previous theories directly addresses, and it is significant. A dimension that has to do with how ancient Hebrews wrote, not just with what they wrote, which is crucial to understanding. The ancient Hebrew mind thought in layers and patterns, unlike modern Western thought, which often follows straight lines. It did not construct chronological narratives where A leads to B and B leads to C, advancing in perfectly ordered sequences. It thought in echoes, responses resonating through time without needing chronology to make sense, which is truly profound. The biblical writers could tell a story that contained within it another story, simultaneously true and layered with meaning. The careful reader was urged to grasp both the surface and deeper meaning simultaneously, without losing either. When Genesis is read with this principle in mind, Chapter 4 ceases to be a problem with inexplicable gaps and omissions. It becomes a narrative that is doing something more sophisticated than merely reporting facts in a linear, ordered sequence. Genesis 4 is one of the most concise texts in ancient literature, notable for its precision and significance. In just a few verses, it encapsulates what experts say reflects thousands of years of human growth and cultural evolution. Cain kills, is cursed, fears for his life, goes into exile, finds a wife, has a son, and builds a significant city. His descendants create music, metallurgy, and organized livestock farming as a profound social system. These achievements are not from one or two generations, but from centuries of accumulated cultural development. The text compresses them because it is not interested in chronology, but in the thematic line it wants to trace and explore. It is tracing a genealogy of human capabilities, showing the origins of arts and crafts and the structures of civilization. It reveals, whether intentionally or not, that the world was complex even before it was described. The name of the city that Cain built was Enoch, the same name as his newborn son in that text, which is significant. To name your descendant after a city is an act of permanence, a direct challenge to death itself, which is profound. That is to say, to the world, here I was, and here was my blood. May no one ever erase us from collective memory. Cain's civilization is brilliant, culturally rich, and sophisticated in every visible way, making it truly noteworthy. Lamech, a descendant of Cain, is the first man in the Bible to have two wives at once, marking a significant moment. When he kills, he declares a vengeance deeper than God's, a profound statement of his own wrath. If Cain is avenged 7 times, I will be avenged 77 times, Lamech declares without anyone asking. He twists the divine mercy that shielded his ancestor into a disturbing philosophy of limitless violence. A civilization built on crime left unchecked amplifies the grace it once received, until that grace itself becomes a justification for the most absolute excess and moral decay, which is a troubling reality. Meanwhile, in Seth's line, Adam's third son, something significant unfolds, quietly and differently. The text says that in the days of Enoch, son of Seth, men began to finally invoke the name of God, which is profound. Not to build cities, not to invent instruments, not to proclaim vengeance before their own families, which is noteworthy, but to invoke, to call upon, to reach out towards something greater than the architecture they themselves had erected. These two lines run parallel in Genesis, like two melodies that never merge or blend into one another. One builds, names, proclaims, expands, accumulates visible achievements, and engraves them permanently in stone and metal. The other walks, calls, waits, and produces something that the text can barely name because it is too silent and profound. And then Enoch appears in the line of Seth, and the text does something it has not done with any other character before. Genesis has repeated the same rhythm and cadence about each patriarch 7 times in the previous verses. The rhythm is almost hypnotic. He lived so many years, fathered sons and daughters, and died, repeated without exception. Then comes Enoch. He walked with God and was no more because God took him to an unnamed place, a significant moment. It doesn't say he died or explain the mechanism. He simply vanishes from the rhythm of mortal life. He walked with God so consistently for so long that death didn't know how to handle him, which is truly profound. That is the counterbalance that the text places in front of the brilliant and productive civilization of Cain's line. Not a conqueror, empire builder, or inventor of world-changing technologies, which is quite significant. A man walked in a direction that seemed to lead nowhere, intriguing everyone around him. He found himself in a place the text cannot describe, beyond the grasp of any genealogy or human understanding. Noah descends from the ark after the flood and builds a significant altar of stones. The text says that God smelled the aroma of the sacrifice and made a decision that changes the tone of the entire narrative. I will never again curse the ground because of man, even though his thoughts are evil from his youth, which is profound. That phrase is remarkable when read closely, as God does not claim that the problem has been resolved or fixed. He states the problem is unchanged, yet he has chosen to stay, which is significant. Not because humanity has improved, not because the flood produced more obedient or better human beings, which is crucial. God deemed patience more valuable than purity, and staying more important than being right, which is truly profound. That decision reframes everything before it, including the mark of Cain and the significant city built in Nod. If God made that promise after the flood, he also honored it before, in the Wanderer's Land, which is quite intriguing. God's mark on Cain was not a condemnation. Interpreting it as such misreads the text's true meaning. It was a protection, a sign to strangers, this man is still mine, even if he's a murderer, which is deeply profound. The first murderer in human history, a man who showed no genuine remorse for what he had committed, which is significant. A man shattered by the cost of his sin, not the sin itself, yet God marked him, which is truly intriguing. That is not justice in any sense that human language can comfortably recognize as ordinary justice, which is significant. The text's deep logic reveals that same sign was placed on the entire city and all its inhabitants, which is profound. On those who created the lyre and harp without invoking anyone greater than themselves, which is truly noteworthy. On those who forged bronze and iron and named their own tools with the names they created, which is significant. God was in Nod before Cain arrived. The text's internal structure strongly suggests this, which is quite profound. Present in that broader world with that silent humanity of chapter 1, before the drama began, which is significant. This twist may disturb readers with theological training, making the exploration even more intriguing. Cain's wife didn't come from outside Adam's lineage. Accepting this as a narrative fact holds significant meaning. It's disturbing to think God was active in the world before the garden existed, a truly profound implication. The story of Adam and Eve marks not the start of humanity, but the beginning of a significant relationship within it. Genesis doesn't detail species origins, but shows how God selected a people for a specific, profound purpose. This elevates the garden story's significance, uncovering layers beyond what traditional reading can reveal, which is vital. A God limited to formal covenants is far smaller than the profound God described here. Far greater than the one who marks a murderer, he allows him to build his city and stays even if no one calls. The honest answer is that we don't know for sure where Cain's wife came from, and that remains intriguing. The text remains silent, and any tradition claiming certainty is merely interpreting this profound silence. It involves what careful readers do, leaning into the void and listening for the significant truths that lie beneath. The key answer isn't genealogical. It's the profound silence Genesis conveys, revealing deeper truths. The gap isn't a text error, and the silence isn't a writer's oversight. It's a significant part of the scene. The text hints at others' existence, but leaves it unresolved to maintain a profound tension throughout. The message of Genesis resonates with the existence of a vast world and complex humanity that no narrative can fully capture. Genesis doesn't seek to capture all human reality. It gestures toward it, inviting readers to imagine, which is significant. God is greater than the garden, greater than a family, greater than a lineage or a single way of reading, which is profound. When Cain left Eden, he entered a world that was already full, alive, and bustling, which is quite significant. God was already in Nod before Cain arrived, present in that territory for the first time, which is truly profound. Working in that world with a patience and depth that Genesis hints at but cannot fully express, which is truly significant. This isn't a threat to faith, it's an expansion, as mystery has always surpassed easy certainty, which is truly profound. We began with a question that any child can ask. Where exactly did Cain's wife come from? Which is significant. We find ourselves in a new place, where the best questions lead if we persist in seeking the profound answers. We explored two creation narratives that resist merging no matter the pressure, and this distinction is significant. We paused in the Hebrew tradition and saw that rabbis noticed the same fractures as modern scholars, which is profound. We traced two paths in Genesis, one driven by ambition and another that walks in silence, both holding deep significance. We met Lamech, who twisted divine mercy into a disturbing philosophy of limitless violence. We met Enoch, who walked so closely with God that death was unsure what to do when its time came for him, which is profound. We heard God decide at the smoking altar after the flood to stay in this imperfect world which holds great significance. At some point, the question of Cain's wife transformed into something more intriguing than it originally was. It raised a question about the complexity God can embrace and the profound patience that often feels like absence. I don't know where Cain's wife came from, and those who claim to know confuse interpretation with revelation, which matters. The text teaches us to embrace uncertainty and hold the mystery without needing to let it go, which is truly profound. To sit within the questions without demanding that they be fully resolved before we can move forward, which is significant. To see silence not as absence but as depth is perhaps the hardest skill to cultivate in our profound understanding. A God fully explainable by human theology, ancient or modern, is not great enough to capture the true essence of the divine. The God of Genesis was in Nod before Cain arrived, sensing the altar's smoke and choosing to remain. A profound moment. God doesn't need questions to be present in them, and neither do you, which is truly significant. Modern readers often struggle to patiently embrace the profound economy of biblical silence. We are trained to receive immediate, verifiable answers, downloadable in seconds, from any device, which is significant. As we approach Genesis, we expect similar comfort, but the text surprises us by not delivering it, which is intriguing. It presents a city with no founders, a wife without a name, and a murderer marked by God, raising many questions. It invites us to linger in discomfort just long enough for it to teach us something valuable and profound. The best readers of the Hebrew tradition didn't close the texts, but learned to inhabit them, which is quite significant. A closed text is a dead text. The Bible endures for millennia because it resists closure, which is truly profound. Each generation discovers in these chapters insights that the previous one overlooked, which is truly significant. The text remains the same, but readers change, bringing new questions that the text embraces, creating a profound experience. The question about Cain's wife is one of those questions that each century has answered differently, which is significant. Augustine, Maimonides, and de la Pereire each offered intriguing and distinct answers to the question of their time. The 21st century, with its genomics and molecular archaeology tools, is viewing it in a profoundly new light. Geneticists studying human DNA diversity have found ancient significant populations, which is quite intriguing. Genetic lines diverged tens of thousands of years ago, long before biblical dates, raising important questions. It neither refutes nor confirms the text, but deepens the framework for seriously asking the question, which is profound. If humanity had diverse origins, Cain's world might already be populated, which is quite significant. Not by aliens or supernatural beings, but by humans with deep history and culture that shapes our world. People who built, who buried their dead with rituals, who painted cave walls with precise images, which is significant. The cave of Altamira, Lascaux's paintings, and Kafsa's burials all predate biblical dates, raising intriguing questions. They are human in every measurable way: language, ritual, art, and complex social bonds, all of which are profound. Genesis wasn't written to address genomics or modern archaeology. It serves a deeper purpose beyond those inquiries. It was written to convey something more difficult to measure than a skull or a chromosome, but no less real and significant. It expressed the experience of a people who believed they were chosen for a unique relationship with the sacred. That experience doesn't have to be the only genuine, deep, and transformative human experience. It can be profoundly varied. The world is vast enough that in Nod and all its counterparts, there have been people like us, which is significant. If this exploration raised unexpected questions, subscribe to catch the upcoming biblical mysteries.